Harrow's fingers danced over the smooth holographic controls of his console, eyes locked onto the vivid display of taverns and trolls. His heart raced as he guided Big Bungus Chungus, his jovial, green-skinned healer character, through a chaotic dungeon run. The Giga Chads, an elite human guild known across the virtual realms, relied on him to keep their front line alive. Heal, Chungus, heal, a voice crackled through his headset. Harrow grinned, adjusting his strategy as the Giga Chads battled against a monstrous, fire-breathing Drake. Here, in this world of magic and mayhem, he was not just Harrow, the scrappy Rowan from the impoverished planet Wandel. He was a hero, a vital part of something much grander than his quiet, star-strewn home. Wandel was not a place of grandeur. It was a dusty, struggling world, far from the wealth and wonder of the Cinderella Confederation, where powerful planets enjoyed prosperity and protection. The Rowan, Harrow's people, were a small, endearing race with features that humans often found captivating. Their hair shimmered in all the colors of the forest, from mossy greens to fiery reds, while their eyes were wide and luminous, like polished jewels. The Rowan were resilient and resourceful, but despite their charm and perseverance, Wandel had never flourished. The planet's economy limped along, trapped in a cycle of scarcity that kept it on the fringes of galactic society. Harrow knew every creaking floorboard and rusted railing of his family's small home. The walls were lined with glowing fungi harvested from the nearby forests, casting a soft, blue light over the simple wooden furniture. Outside, lush, rolling hills sprawled beneath a sky that was far too vast and empty, save for the occasional streak of a distant ship. There was something lonely about it all. Yet for as long as he could remember, Harrow's dreams had been colored by stories of adventure and the wonders beyond Wandel. And it was humanity, with their wild, fascinating culture, that had captured his imagination. For generations, human smugglers had been visiting Wandel, drawn to the Rowan's charm and the planet's unique bioluminescent flora. These traders brought with them more than just off-world goods. They brought stories, music, and gadgets that dazzled young Rowan. Harrow grew up hearing tales of Earth's vast cities, its soaring towers and bustling markets. Some humans had even written about the Rowan in Earth's media, spinning myths of an adorable woodland people hidden on a far-off world. That narrative had enchanted Harrow, along with the human technology that made everything seem possible. The cultural fascination wasn't just a hobby, it was a beacon of hope. When Harrow first discovered taverns and trolls, it felt like a portal into the life he had always yearned for. The game was more than just a pastime. It was his bridge to human culture and the stars. He learned to speak fluent English by listening to his guildmates argue and joke in rapid-fire slang, and he picked up on human customs, even if he had never left Wandel. From the grand festivals they described to the way they would tease each other with absurd nicknames, Harrow absorbed every detail. He was captivated by their humor and their courage, their loud, confident way of existing. In the game, Harrow was not a quaint Rowan teenager eking out a quiet life on a struggling world. He was Big Bungus Chungus, essential and brave, basking in the camaraderie of people from a galaxy away. The bond Harrow shared with his human friends was as real as any friendship could be, despite the countless light years between them. He had grown especially close to a player named John, whose deep, booming laughter filled their late-night dungeon runs with warmth. They exchanged jokes about Earth's bizarre foods and laughed over Rowan myths that John found both hilarious and endearing. John had even sent Harrow a virtual postcard of Earth's oceans, where blue water stretched to the horizon, teeming with whales and dancing waves. Harrow had stared at it for hours, longing to see such wonders for himself, to feel the salty air on his face. But beneath his love for human culture lay a deeper longing. Harrow dreamed of escaping Wandel's struggles, of finding a place where he and his people could thrive, not just survive. He yearned to see stars up close, to witness the grandeur of the galaxy that humans seemed to navigate so effortlessly. In those moments, when his friends spoke of bustling spaceports and breathtaking alien worlds, he felt a pang of envy, but also hope. If humans could explore the stars, why couldn't the Rowan? Maybe, just maybe, he could be part of something greater, something more significant than his family's struggle to patch up their leaking roof. The game allowed him to taste that dream, even if it was fleeting. Each time Harrow's healer kept his guildmates alive through a vicious raid, he felt a little more like the hero he wanted to be. Yet as he pulled off another successful heal and heard John's voice congratulating him, he couldn't help but feel the tug of reality. Wanda was a long way from the shining worlds of the Confederation, and no game could change that. But it didn't matter, not in those moments of shared triumph. Harrow felt like he belonged, like his dreams weren't so impossible after all. Harrow leaned back in his worn-out gaming chair, the dull creak of the metal frame barely audible over the cheers and laughter ringing in his headset. Big bungus for the win. John's voice came through, bright and full of life, as Harrow completed another miraculous save with a well-timed healing spell. The dungeon raid was a success, and his guildmates, the legendary Giga Chads, celebrated their latest victory. Harrow smiled, his heart swelling with the thrill of being part of something meaningful, even if it was all digital. The buzz of his communications array, however, shattered that moment of joy. It was a sharp, grating sound cutting through the ambient glow of his room like a knife. Harrow's smile faded, and he turned his head toward the old, crackling device blinking urgently on his desk. Another alert buzzed, then another. Something was terribly wrong. The chatter of the game faded into a dull hum as Harrow's ears tuned into the growing noise outside. He pushed himself up, his limbs feeling suddenly heavy, and stumbled over to the window. The sky above Wandel, usually a soft, endless expanse of blue and lavender, was now scarred with streaks of fire and metal. Massive Mandarin warships had broken through the atmosphere, their imposing forms blotting out the light of the twin suns. Harrow's hands tightened on the window frame, his knuckles white with fear. The horizon shimmered with energy blasts, and explosions ripped through the distant hills where Rowan families lived in scattered, peaceful clusters. Panic gripped the town like a vice. Rowan children screamed, clinging to their parents as they ran for cover. The Rowan security forces, brave but hopelessly outmatched, scrambled to mount a defense. Harrow could see them in their mismatched armor, their tiny figures dwarfed by the hulking Mandarin dropships descending like metal predators. Energy shields flickered and failed as the first wave of invaders touched down, and Harrow's heart lurched with the realization that Wanda was woefully unprepared. "Mom. Dad," he called out, his voice breaking. The familiar, cozy home he had always known now felt fragile, as if it could splinter apart at any moment. His parents burst into the room, fear etched deep into their faces. Harrow's mother grabbed his arm, her grip firm but trembling. "We need to hide," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. But Harrow couldn't move. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where bright flashes of battle lit up the fields and forests. It was like watching a nightmare unfold, but he wasn't dreaming. This was real. The Mandarin, their metallic hover tanks and legions of soldiers spilling across the land, were here to tear Wandel apart. In a sudden burst of desperation, Harrow yanked his arm free and stumbled back to his gaming setup. His guildmates' voices still buzzed through his headset, oblivious to the destruction. "Guys, I need your help," Harrow shouted, his voice cracking. The chatter silenced and a concerned voice John's came through first. "What's going on?" Harrow's fingers fumbled over the controls, pulling up a shaky live stream of the chaos outside. "It's an invasion," he managed, his throat tight. "Mandarin warships are attacking Wandel. We don't have the defenses to fight them." The silence on the other end of the line felt heavy. John's voice, now grim, cut through the tension. "Stay safe, Harrow. I'll see what I can do." The perspective shifted to John, a young man sitting in a cluttered bedroom filled with posters and memorabilia from his family's military history. His mother, a stern but kind-eyed officer, stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. John spun around in his chair, his face pale. "Mom, you have to call the military. Wandel is under attack." She frowned, the weight of her position pressing on her shoulders. "Wandel isn't part of the Confederation," she replied, though the worry in her eyes was unmistakable. John clenched his fists, frustration boiling over. "Please, Mom. Harrow is there. His people are innocent. We can't just stand by." The scene shifted again, this time to the command deck of the Big Mouth base, a sleek, powerful human warship patrolling the outer rim. The officers, clad in pristine white uniforms, debated the unfolding crisis. Wandel isn't our jurisdiction, one officer argued. Intervening could spark a diplomatic nightmare, another officer, younger but resolute, countered. But if we do nothing, an entire race could be wiped out. The Rowan are unarmed civilians. It's a massacre. Captain Price, a grizzled veteran with a hardened expression, listened to the debate, his gaze fixed on the live feed of Wandel's devastation. The Mandarin forces were relentless, and the Rowan were already being pushed to the brink. Price sighed, running a hand over his stubbled jaw. "We're not here to police the galaxy," he said, his voice heavy. "But we are here to protect the innocent." A sudden, urgent message pinged through the comm system. It was a desperate, garbled cry for help, transmitted from Wandel. The voice belonged to a young Rowan, speaking fluent but shaky English. Harrow's voice. "Please. Anyone, we're being overrun. We need help." The room fell silent, the weight of Harrow's plea settling over the crew. Captain Price's eyes narrowed. "Set a course for Wandel," he ordered, his voice carrying a steely resolve. "We can't let them fall." The officers moved into action, their debate forgotten. The Big Mouth base turned, its engines roaring to life, as the human forces prepared for an unplanned and perilous rescue mission. The sky above Wandel tore apart as the Big Mouth base burst into the atmosphere, followed closely by a swarm of sleek human destroyers. The ship's engines roared like thunder, a sound that rattled through the bones of every Rowan and Mandarin soldier below. Harrow, peering out from the cracked window of his small home, felt his heart leap with a desperate, fragile hope. The human warships were a sight to behold, their hulls shimmering under the harsh, fractured light of battle as they sliced through the smoky sky with lethal grace. Beams of energy lashed out from the Big Mouth base, striking Mandarin warships and carving fiery trails through the heavens. The enemy fleet, massive and brutal, met the attack head-on, their own cannons spitting deadly, blue plasma. High above, the Big Mouth base's crew worked in a frenzy, coordinating with the destroyers to outmaneuver the Mandarin fleet. The space battle was a dance of fire and death, with ships twisting through the void, narrowly avoiding collisions and blasts. The human forces had arrived, but the Mandarin would not yield easily. Their ships, dark and jagged like the fangs of a great beast, loomed with an unyielding menace. Inside one of the human dropships, Fryn gripped her rifle, her hands steady despite the storm of chaos outside. She was a Wypal trooper, fierce and battle-hardened, her golden skin glowing faintly under the dropship's red lights. Her people, the Wypal, were renowned warriors who had fought alongside humans in countless battles. Fryn's dark eyes narrowed as the dropship shuddered, Mandarin fighters streaking past and hammering their convoy with explosive rounds. "Brace yourselves," the pilot shouted, his voice strained. The dropship lurched as a blast tore through a neighboring transport, sending debris spiraling into the void. Fryn took a deep breath, steeling herself for the drop. Her heart beat like a drum, but her resolve never wavered. The Wypal lived for moments like this, moments where courage and skill defined the line between life and death. Around her, her fellow troopers checked their gear, their faces hardened with the same determination. The red lights flickered to green, signaling it was time. The rear doors blasted open, revealing a hellscape of fire and falling metal. Fryn led the charge, leaping into the void, her drop pod hurtling toward Wandel's burning surface. The descent was a nightmare. Mandarin bombers roared overhead, their payloads painting the ground below in waves of fiery destruction. Fryn gritted her teeth, gripping the controls of her pod as it spun through the carnage. The pods around her deployed their thrusters, weaving through the chaos to avoid becoming easy targets. The sky was a battlefield of its own, and every second was a fight for survival. Fryn's pod slammed into the ground with a bone-jarring impact, the door blasting off as she leaped out, rifle raised and eyes sharp. The battle on Wandel's surface was chaos given form. Human soldiers and Wypal troopers engaged Mandarin infantry in brutal, close-quarters combat. Energy blasts lit up the battlefield, illuminating the crumbling remains of Rowan homes and the fields where Harrow had once played. Mandarin hover tanks glided through the wreckage, their cannons raining destruction, while human heavy weapons teams scrambled to bring them down. Fryn charged forward, firing controlled bursts as she wove through the madness. Her squad followed, disciplined and deadly, taking cover where they could and picking off enemy soldiers with precision. The Mandarin forces were relentless, Their armor-clad infantry advanced in perfect, merciless formations, and their hover tanks crushed everything in their path. Fryn found herself pinned behind a shattered Rowan statue, her breathing heavy. "Focus fire on that tank," she barked, and her troopers obeyed, launching rockets that streaked toward the monstrous machine. The explosion that followed was deafening, but there was no time to celebrate. Mandarin troops swarmed in, and Fryn met them head-on, her rifle blazing. She fought with the ferocity of someone who knew no fear, her golden skin streaked with grime and sweat, her heart pounding with determination. Back in his small home, Harrow huddled under his gaming desk, his whole body trembling. The battle raged all around him, the walls shaking with every explosion, the air thick with smoke and the screams of his people. He clutched his headset, listening as his human friends in the Giga Chads tried to comfort him, their voices distant but warm. "Stay low," Harrow John said, his voice cracking. "We're coming. Just hold on." Harrow dared to peek out from beneath the desk, his wide eyes reflecting the flames that consumed his once familiar world. Through the shattered window, he could see human soldiers in their sleek combat gear, their movements precise and powerful. They fought with a strength and unity that Harrow had only imagined, their voices calling out commands as they pushed the Mandarin back. Waipal troopers, glowing with otherworldly intensity, fought alongside them, their battle cries cutting through the din. Harrow was in awe, but the fear in his chest was a heavy, suffocating weight. He had never felt so small. A sudden explosion tore through a neighboring home, and Harrow ducked, shielding his head as debris rained down. His heart felt like it would burst. The human soldiers outside pressed on, covering each other and pushing deeper into Rowan territory. One soldier, a woman with a scar across her cheek, paused long enough to look Harrow's way. She gave him a quick nod, a silent reassurance that he was not forgotten. Harrow clung to that gesture, a lifeline in the storm. The battle was far from over. Mandarin hover tanks still loomed, their cannons firing in relentless arcs, and enemy reinforcements poured in like an unending tide. Fryn found herself back-to-back with a human sergeant, the two of them taking down enemy soldiers in a dance of coordinated violence. "We can't let them push us back," the sergeant shouted, and Fryn nodded, her teeth bared in a fierce grin. She launched herself into the fray once more, her rifle a blur of motion, her spirit unbroken. Harrow watched it all, frozen and terrified, yet also filled with a sense of awe he couldn't quite describe. The heroes he had dreamed of were real, fighting to save his world, and despite the fear, a small spark of hope began to burn in his chest. The Mandarin warships, once towering juggernauts of destruction in Wandel's sky, erupted in a series of brilliant, shattering explosions. The big mouth base and the human destroyers had pressed forward with unyielding firepower, blasting through enemy formations with relentless precision. As the final Mandarin ship disintegrated, debris scattered across the heavens like a meteor shower, and a heavy silence followed. The human forces had won, and Wandel was saved. But the planet bore the scars of the battle. Rolling hills once covered in bioluminescent flora were now blackened wastelands, and the charming wooden homes of the Rowan lay in splinters, smoke curling into the sky. Fires burned in the distance, and the cries of the wounded and grieving filled the air. Rowan families emerged from their hiding places, faces pale and eyes wide with shock. Relief mixed with sorrow, a bitter and complicated emotion. Wandel had survived, but it would never be the same. Harrow crawled out from under his gaming desk, his legs shaky and his ears still ringing from the constant barrage of explosions. His home was barely standing, walls cracked and windows shattered, but it was still there. A wave of exhaustion washed over him, and he slumped against the ruined desk, drawing in deep, ragged breaths. The battle was over. He was alive. Tears pricked at his eyes, a mix of overwhelming relief and disbelief. The sound of heavy boots on the fractured ground outside drew Harrow's attention. He scrambled to his feet and stumbled out of the house, blinking through the smoke and dust. Human soldiers were moving through the wreckage, helping the injured and securing what remained of the town. One of them, the scarred woman he had seen earlier, was speaking to a group of Rowan elders. Her helmet was off, and she looked tired but determined, her eyes kind as she reassured the Rowan with quiet words. Harrow took a shaky step forward, his heart pounding with a new kind of fear. Then he saw a familiar face among the soldiers. John, his friend from taverns and trolls, stood in the crowd, his combat gear dusty and worn but his smile bright when he spotted Harrow. The two of them locked eyes, and in that moment, Harrow felt a rush of emotion he couldn't contain. He ran forward, and John met him halfway, pulling the Rowan into a fierce, grateful hug. "You made it," Harrow choked out, his voice cracking. John laughed, a sound raw but full of relief. "Of course we did. Couldn't let my favorite healer down, could I?" They pulled back, and Harrow wiped at his eyes, a smile breaking through his exhaustion. Around them, Rowan children and elders gathered, murmuring in awe at the human soldiers who had fought for their home. One of the Rowan elders approached, his vibrant green hair dulled with ash but his posture dignified. He spoke in halting English, the language Harrow had taught many of them, and thanked the humans for their bravery. The scarred woman listened, nodding with respect. When the elder gestured to Harrow, the soldier's gaze softened, understanding dawning in her expression. "You called for us," she said, looking at Harrow. "Your message. It made all the difference." Harrow's cheeks flushed with pride and humility. His fascination with humans, the hours he had spent learning their culture and language, had helped save his world. It was a strange, wondrous feeling, and he found himself standing a little taller. He realized then how deeply connected he had become to humanity, not just through a game, but through bonds forged in courage and trust. As the humans and Rowan began to work together, helping the injured and assessing the damage, the Rowan leadership gathered in what remained of the town square. Humbled but filled with a newfound resolve, they discussed the future. The battle had shown them that Wandel could no longer remain isolated. The Rowan were a proud people, but they had seen what mercy and strength humanity had offered them in their darkest hour. It was time to repay that kindness. Harrow watched as his mother and father joined the discussion, their expressions weary but hopeful. The elders, with their vibrant hair and shining eyes, spoke of offering tribute to humanity not just in thanks but in solidarity. They would fight alongside the human forces, contribute their skills and unique knowledge to the greater war effort. It was a decision born of pride, but also of a deep desire to protect their home and make sure it never faced such a threat alone again. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the devastated town, but there was a flicker of light in the sky. The big mouth base hovered above, a symbol of salvation and strength, its hull gleaming like a guardian in the fading twilight. Harrow felt something stir in his chest, a longing he had carried for years. This was his chance, not just to see the stars but to make a difference among them. When the Rowan elders called for volunteers, Harrow stepped forward without hesitation. His parents exchanged a worried but proud look, and Harrow's mother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Harrow nodded, determination blazing in his eyes. "I want to help. I want to be part of something greater." John grinned, clapping Harrow on the back. "Looks like we'll be fighting side by side," he said. Harrow laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in days. The other Rowan volunteers gathered around, their faces a mixture of fear and excitement. They would leave their quiet world behind, but they would carry its spirit with them. As the human soldiers prepared to depart, the Rowan volunteers, Harrow among them, looked up at the big mouth base. The stars beyond felt a little closer now, and Harrow's heart beat with a new rhythm, one of hope, courage, and an unbreakable bond with the friends who had fought for his home. The journey ahead would be full of challenges, but he was ready to earn his place among the stars.